That's my favorite. That's my favorite. For the room, I'll call order. And to the crowd out there, we're fashionably late. Welcome to the NHS UK Redesign and Standards Show and Tell, starting at 2:01. So first error on the first slide. Any more, please let us know. So my name's Ian Roddis. I'm lead product manager across the Redesign and Standards team. And this is our first broadcast to the world. And the many people gathered in the room. If I had a camera, I'd turn it around, but I don't. So please be gentle with us, or rather, not really. We like hard questions, so please be hard with us. Both teams have been in existence for just over a year, Redesign and Standards. But since June, we've been working as one to deliver the redesigned version of NHS UK, 50 million visitors a month website, and meant to roll forward the standards and patterns, well, the patterns and designs as standards into the service manual. So this is the agenda. This is what we're going to cover today, the service manual, the thing. We'll show a bit. We'll talk about the redesign of the NHS UK website, which is why we've been able to do this work. We will show a thing in the front-end library and the prototyping kit, which we're very proud of. In parks, we're standing on the shoulders of giants in the form of GDS. But the particularities of health, we've done some great work around content style guide, health literacy, and in this session, we will freely and liberally talk about pee and poo. So if you're of a sensitive nature, please step away. But actually, that sensitivity is really important about why we do what we do. We will talk about a hypothesis for a service standard for health. And we'll obviously talk about what next and take any questions. And if you have questions, we'll be taking questions in the room, but also keeping an eye on our email, which is on the screen, service-manual@nhs.net. And if we don't deal with the questions in the session today, we'll get back to you afterwards, because this is very much a two-way thing. We want to hear about you. We want to hear about what you're doing. And ideally, we want you to contribute in GitHub and build patterns so we don't have to. So, the NHS Service Manual. If you haven't seen it already, I'm going to ask why not. But you can find it at beta.nhsuk/service-manual. And if you're familiar with the work of Government Digital Service and other governments, you should be familiar with the concept of a service manual. And that's a manual that contains things you need to make consistent, usable services that put people first. We launched ours in September in beta. We just gently let it out there. And it very much builds on the work of GDS, but recognizes, and as we go through the session, hopefully illustrate some of the differences in health, both the fragmented nature of the journey with multiple service providers, but also the emotional nature of it, whether you've had a life-changing diagnosis or you have to learn to live with a particular treatment. So this is the service manual. We'll draw from the range of things within it, ranging from, again, this is the second mention, why we use words like pee and poo. We'll show you how you can easily build service using our front-end library, but we'll also stress the importance of the guidance. So we don't want people to build beautiful nonsense just because you've got all these patterns. We want you to focus on user needs. We want you to do primary research, test with users, launch and iterate. And again, we'll remind of the importance of health literacy. So all this content we push out there is no good if folks don't comprehend it. And it's either comprehend it in that immediate moment of diagnosis or as they enter a complex health journey. And we will explain why we think we need our own NHS service standard to measure success against. And in some respect, act as a guiding North Star. So I will now hand over to my colleague, Dean Vipond. In between.
Hi there, everyone. I'm Dean. I'm lead designer for the NHS website. I'm just going to talk to you about how we actually went through the redesign process of that. So the NHS website at nhs.uk is really, really big and really, really old. We've had it for over 10 years. It was previously known as NHS Choices. It was around 40,000 pages. So this wasn't a quick and dirty redesign process. We needed to understand what the content was that was there, how to bring that all up to a standard that we would expect now, as well as draw on all the learnings from the last 2 or 3 years where teams have been working in the NHS alpha and beta phases, working on new products and new ways of working. So how can we take all of that and try to understand what we need the website to do now, whether it's a starting point for a health journey or whether it's a waypoint during a health journey and someone's experience with the health and care system. That was what we were tackling as we were approaching the design. So last September, we launched the new design for NHS UK. It has a much more clearer graphic design style. It presents the NHS in a way that people would expect and trust. And it also sets things up for new services. It's more accessible, it's more readable. Also, we spent a lot of time working on signposting and action-based working for people. So whatever people are coming here to do, whether they're just Googling something, a condition or something, or whether they're coming here as part of a much longer experience of the health and care system, we have a clear system of showing people what they need to do and when they need to do it so they can make better choices about their health and care. We've also spent a lot of time on accessibility. So we've done a lot of testing. We grounded accessibility as the foundation of our approach to design for this. Just an example of that, we have a lot of conditions content, and we have lists of things to do and don't on those, which we found in research people found extremely useful. These components that we have, we just simply had a list that says don't, and then it lists all the things that you're not supposed to do for a condition, whether it's chickenpox as we're showing here. But we found when we were doing testing with fully blind users that the don't list, actually, as you start to go down, you may forget that you're in a thing that's labeled don't. So as we're saying don't use ibuprofen if you have chickenpox or something, actually we needed to make sure very clearly that that was stipulated at every point. So you can see now our do and don't lists say do not at the beginning. So that's the kind of stuff that you can only really find out when you do really careful manual accessibility testing with real people. So obviously we've done lots of research, we've built lots of components and we've designed lots of stuff, but we don't want to sort of keep that for ourselves. There's no point just having one website that does this when other teams and other people working on health and care services could benefit from the stuff that we've done. So as you probably would have guessed, we've put all of that on the service manual. So that's everything from the individual components and the code that you can take and build new services with, but all the research that we've put in as well. So you can see how we've arrived at the solution we have. So that then helps other teams understand whether there's circumstances where a component could work for them and their users, or whether there's other circumstances that they may need to do continued research. And what we really want from people is to take the stuff that we've done so far, do more research with it, and let us know where it works and where it doesn't. And that's the only way that we can make things better. And so with that, we've built a load of stuff that's in a front-end library and prototyping kit. And I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, Michael and Ben, who are going to talk about that a bit more. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Michael Chung. I'm a front-end developer, and I'm going to talk about the front-end library. So what is a front-end library? Well, it contains all the code that you need to build NHS websites and services. We based it on the gov.uk front-end library, but we built upon it. We've adapted it to work for the NHS. So, for example, we've used our sort of colour schemes and created and adapted components to meet the health needs of our users. So why did we do this? Well, it saves teams time. It means that teams don't have to start from scratch when they're starting a new project. So rather than creating new code, teams can focus their time and money on researching and solving the specific problems that their users have. So everything in the library has been individually tested. So they've been tested via browsers, on different browsers, on various devices, different screen sizes, using assistive technologies. The code adheres to accessibility guidelines, so the teams that are using it don't need to worry about all that sort of stuff. We've also tested the components in user research labs and in pop-up research, and we've also had it externally audited as well. So the code is open to the public. It's on a public GitHub repository. So anybody can see it. It's open for all NHS teams to have a look at. So we're hoping to build like a community where teams can contribute to it and build upon it. So, for example, if a team creates a component or finds a pattern that's useful, that may be useful for other teams, then hopefully they will contribute back to it so that everybody else can use it. We've also created style guides and standards to help with the contribution so that they know what they're looking to do. And we've also had a look to industry experts and even the wider gov.uk community. They've also had a look as well. So as well as it being looked at by teams, internal teams within the NHS.uk programme, other teams have also looked at it, such as the ERS, the e-referral service, which is for patients to book appointments online, the NHS Apps Library and the NHS National Data Opt-out Programme are also in the process of fully utilising it in their websites. And wider still, we've had discussions with the NHS Business Services Authority and the University of Central Lancashire are going to be doing some work as well. So they've both had a look and we've had discussions with them. So we needed a way for teams to experiment and use this library. So in order to do that, we built a prototyping kit. So I'll just pass you over to Ben, who's going to talk about that.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, I'm Ben, interaction designer. I'm going to take you through our prototyping kit and just show you how easy it is for you and your team and how it can help you. So we've made a prototyping kit. It makes use of the front-end library that Michael's taken you through. It requires minimum skills to get started, and it allows teams to rapidly create prototypes for sharing ideas and testing with users. So you'll be able to find the prototype kit from the service manual. Within there, we have lots of guides on how to install and how to create pages and templates. And like all good things, it's been based on Gov's kit, but we've built and iterated. So let's make a prototype. Like I said, I'm a designer, not a developer. It's dead easy. And this is I'm just going to walk you through how easy it is. So start straight out of the box. We have a blank page. The header and footer on this example page is set to NHS UK, but it's dead easy just to swap them around to your organisation. I'll start by adding a header. So I've copied some text style. This is all from the service manual. We have code snippets. So just copying that code snippet, pasting it in a text editor, and then voila, the new heading is in the prototype. So I'll add one of the do and don't lists that Dean mentioned. Again, code from the manual that you can just copy and paste it into the editor and maybe edit a bit of the content. And we have a page with a title and do and don't lists. And then finally, I'll add a button. So again, service manual, copy the code, paste into the text editor, and finally, prototype done and ready to test with users. It is that easy. So a lot of our documentation, the installation guides, the how-tos, we've been testing internally. We've been testing with a number of different roles, from interaction designers to content designers. Here we have Afsa, who's a service designer who flew through it. She did an amazing job. Well done. And we've been iterating our documents. Yes. So why have we done this? Similar to the front-end kit, it saves teams time, saves money, and allows teams to focus on unique problems. So what's next for us? So far, we've iterated guidance based on the feedback from the testing that I've suggested. As this is for everyone, we've been exploring colleagues' perceptions of working with code and trying to uncover potential blockers for people adopting this and trying to address those fears. We're also looking to run code clubs, helping people with the kit, and we're speaking to GDS and sharing the learning, the things that we've found back with them. So that's us. Thank you. And I'll pass to Sarah.
Thanks, Ben. And I've got Caroline Jarrett with us today, the forms expert, and we're going to do this as a double up.
Yes, because we thought we'd change it up a bit. And so I'm Caroline Jarrett, and I'm really just here as an interviewer. And first I want a promise from Sarah, which is each time I call you Sarah, will you kick me sharply in the ankle?
I will.
Okay, so, I mean, content is really crucial to the forms, but this content style guide is more about the massive amount of content pages in the NHS. So could you tell me a bit more about that?
Sure, yeah. I mean, this is the NHS website. It's the largest health website in the UK. And we have literally thousands of pages there. A lot of them, as you say, content about different kinds of health conditions, but also some services and forms on there as well. And this is an example of a typical conditions page. And you can see there that we've also brought in some of those design components that Dean and Ben were talking about earlier on.
So tell me something about this. This looks like a gov.uk page to me.
That's right. And initially, I mean, a lot of our content designers, I mean, they do refer to gov.uk guidance and A to Z, but we also had several old NHS content style guides and A to Zs. And basically, we wanted to sort of bring things together and very much sort of look at what we needed in health and what was coming out of our user research and how we could capture some of that stuff and share it more widely.
So this is the new one, is it?
That's right. This is our content style guide, which we published back in September. There's various different sections in there, but I particularly wanted to talk about the A to Z, which is the new bit, which we just published. So there it is. And I mean, basically, it's very much about the words and phrases we use to make our content as easy for people to understand as possible. As I said, it comes out very much from our user research, and also things like our Google Analytics we're looking at, and the kinds of words that people are putting into Google, as well as talking to different teams across NHS Digital and increasingly more widely to find out the kinds of terms that they find that their users find helpful.
So I've seen you publish something recently about pee and poo.
I have indeed. I've published a blog about pee and poo, and Ian promised that we would talk a bit about pee and poo, and it appears in the A to Z. And the reason for that is that pee and poo actually illustrate very much the kinds of challenges we face as content designers, and also the approach that we take to sort of understanding and resolving them. And with pee and poo, we know we get a lot of complaints about them. So we went and looked at our website user survey feedback. We looked at over 10,000 responses and found that about 1 in 10 people do complain about language, or rather the people that are talking about language, about 1 in 10 of them do complain about words like pee and poo. But the other 9 out of 10 like the way that we talk about health. We actually took some of these words, pee and poo, and some of the others to a user research group and looked particularly with people with low literacy levels. So we're looking at some people who had high literacy levels, some who had low literacy levels. With pee and urine, people understood those words well, but particularly with people who had a lower literacy level, they were more likely to use pee than urine. With poo, we found that no one uses stools. People with both high and low literacy levels don't use bowel movement, they use poo. So that's really why we're using those words. We know that people understand them, even if they don't like them.
And I noticed that a few people here are sitting on stools, and I don't think they were thinking anything about poo. Yeah. So it shows that there's some ambiguity there as well.
We've had similar ambiguity with we, because we wondered about using we, but in fact, if you're using voice technology, again, it could mean we meaning us or we meaning tiny. So that's why we've gone with pee and poo.
So tell us a bit more about the whole health literacy thing.
Yep, one of our teams has been doing some work on health literacy recently. Just to say what health literacy is, it's about people being able to understand and use our information to manage their health. And it's understanding and using, acting, being able to act on it. Some quite sort of striking figures, really. 40% of people, actually it's more than that, 40% of people typically struggle with health information. If you add in numbers, so whether it be BMI or dosage information, for example, it goes up to 60% of people won't fully understand the health information.
Those numbers are really massive, aren't they?
Yeah. And we know it's common, low health literacy. We also know that it's linked to poor health outcomes, and it creates a burden for the NHS. So people, for example, are less likely to take up screening and less likely to have vaccinations, things like that. So there's a cost. It's been estimated at up to 5% of the NHS budget. So basically, one of our teams, went and looked at some of our own content, did an audit of our content, found that it's not as readable as we would like it to be, not as easy to understand. They looked at just rewording stuff, and that did help, but it wasn't really until they started from scratch and worked some of our content very much looking at the design principles as a whole, the service manual as a whole. So working to our design principles, working to the new content, the content style guide, that's what made a difference.
Excellent. So it's not just the A to Z that stands alone, it's taking the complete user-centered design approach.
That's right, and testing with users.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. So over to Hayley and Ian.
Hi everyone, I'm Hayley, the user researcher in the team for standards and the service manual. So you may have heard of the government service standard, and I'm sure a few of you are very familiar with it and probably used it to guide your work. It's a set of criteria to help government build and run digital services that are good enough for public use. So we wanted to find out if a similar standard for the NHS would improve quality of health services, and particularly digital services. So we know that design of NHS services and websites is often inconsistent. We are aware that many aren't designed in a way that is accessible for everyone, and design often doesn't start with user needs, and teams are solving similar problems in different ways, so there's some wasted time there. We know the GDS, so the government's digital service standard and assessment process, exists to improve government services for users. And we also knew that this only benefits a small minority of NHS digital services, so only a small minority of NHS teams go through an assessment or use this to guide their work, and we wanted to explore that a bit more. So we asked, what can we do to improve the quality of NHS digital services? So in multiple rounds of research, we spoke to 41 people across 16 NHS delivery teams. So we covered all the kind of roles within the delivery team, so user researchers, content designers, tech leads, product leads. We also spoke to content designers, we spoke to clinicians as well, because a lot of NHS delivery teams will have clinicians in them. We observed their work and we questioned how they deliver digital services. So we kind of interrogated a bit of how they were doing things and spoke to people. And one of the things we asked early on in our discovery research was how confident they were that their standard would pass each GDS, their service would pass each GDS standard point. So as you can see here, we've got a draft of the GDS standard and feature the things around, so we've got a thing around meeting users' needs, user research, running a service, so iterative development, choosing technology, open source, defining what success looks like. So how do you think your service would perform against that point? So we found some themes that came up in this piece of research and also throughout our kind of discovery and alpha. So people were less confident on points that relate to success measures. So people weren't confident they were measuring benefit very well. They weren't that confident they were solving a whole problem. So people said things like they were given quite a narrow scope to focus on. People said things like the physical bit of the journey, we can't touch that. And they weren't confident they had the authority or ability to choose the right technology. And this came up again and again. So we also saw, so we had the assumption at the beginning that the GDS standard only benefits a small minority of people. And we did see inconsistent use of the GDS standard. So we saw roughly 4 types of users kind of based on kind of attitude towards it and use of the standard to guide their work. So there was a group of people who are unsure whether they should follow this. I've heard about it. No one's really mentioned it. None of my stakeholders or my commissioners have mentioned it. Should I be doing it? There are a group of people who are really sure it wasn't relevant to them because it's for the civil service, it's for government, health, it's different. For example, they thought that one thing we heard a couple of times was that the emotional aspect of the journey is much more important for health. Government is just car tax discs or renewing your car tax, stuff like that. That was the perception that some users had. Some users just weren't familiar with it. Pretty much everyone had heard of it, but there was a small group who just hadn't seen it really. And there was an interesting group who were kind of aware and interested. So these are people who are using it to guide their work, but they might be the only person in their team who's they're trying to influence their kind of colleagues to do more user research or do more iterative development. But they didn't really feel they had the backing to do that as much as they like. So they're kind of bought into it. But so here's an example of someone we spoke to. They said, I get that it needs to be accessible, talking about a patient-facing service. If it's something for a GP receptionist, I don't know if we should aim for the same sorts of standards. So the NHS employs around 1.5 million people. It's one of the largest employers in the world. And we need to be thinking about the variety of needs that people will have. So there's some confusion on those some areas. We also heard in our research that people didn't feel they had enough backing to persuade their commissioners to do things like iteration and user-centered design. This came quite a lot. People wanted something to point to or something with authority. They could say, we want to do things differently. We don't do things the right way. They also said, some people said that they could use a standard to influence suppliers or commission suppliers and tell them what they should be doing. So this is a user who was that kind of aware and interested, possibly user kind of interested in the GDS standard, used it to guide their work, had used the service manual, the GDS service manual, but for their stakeholders, the GDS doesn't mean anything to them. Having something for the NHS would be really useful. So we drafted a standard based on the points from government, because a lot of that is applicable to health. And we, based on what we saw in Discovery, we kind of added some unique points or changed some of the points to be relevant to health. When we showed people an NHS branded standard, they were clear it was for them and for other NHS teams. Some users also thought it could be used to commission suppliers and other health agencies, as we kind of mentioned before. So we also found there were some key differences between health and government. This came up on a Discovery research, but also some desk research, and I'll go through the things. So face-to-face contact, so physical touch points in the journey, are nearly always essential to meeting the user need and solving the user problem. There are very few tasks and goals that can be completed solely online when it comes to health. For example, our 111 online service, which deals with urgent health queries, it can only work if the service can refer people to frontline services, such as emergency dentists. We have to think about clinical safety and effectiveness. I couldn't think of an example where we don't have to think about this. This can make measuring, which is obviously very unique to health, but it has some complications around it. So it can make measuring success, so ultimate benefit, actually more complex. For example, how do we measure that the advice given online will actually lead to an improvement in someone's health or change their behavior? So there's complexities there. It can also make contextual research harder. So, for example, we spoke to a team who'd been through a GDS assessment, which is a small minority of teams. They brought a clinician along because they wanted to explain the kind of difficulties of doing contextual, so research actually in A&E. So they kind of had issues there. So this is probably not unique to health, but there's a lot of issues around this area. So we need systems to talk to each other. NHS technology is diverse and often doesn't share data between different systems. We had lots of services and local areas. There's a lot of problems with this, with costs and time wasted, but this also means that patients can be less safe. For example, when being referred between frontline services, so from hospital to another clinic, or so as it's called, improving interoperability, which means systems can talk to each other, users' data can be shared between different services. It's an important part of the Department of Health and Social Care's Future for Healthcare policy paper. So it's recognised at a broader level that this is important and a problem we need to fix. So that was a quick summary of the research we did. There's a lot of stuff we learned. So if you'd like to ask me or anyone else in the team, we'd be really happy to share. There's a lot of interesting stuff that came out of it. I'll hand over to Ian now, who will talk a bit more about what's coming next.
Thanks, Hayley. So we have a hypothesis which we're going to push out into the world because, and I forgive the sentence construction and grammar, it's probably terrible compared to our standards, but I wanted to make a point, and so I could do the emphasis. So we believe that a service standard tailored to health, which acts as a guiding North Star, will help teams across the NHS deliver better services more efficiently. That's our hypothesis. And so, as Hayley said, we built a thing, and I'm going to have to contact our colleagues in GDS as to when the new service standard will be made live, because we've got a bit of a dependency on the proposed new service standard, and Tim Paul and Stephen Gill have been a bit quiet on that. So if you're out there, Tim and Stephen will be coming and asking you about that. So, but this was based on, many of you may have seen the new government service standard, I believe, I want to say 14 points, clustered in a number of sections, the first one being meeting user needs. So this is what we built and what we tested, and what I will mention it now, but I'll mention it in a bit. We're starting to use the guiding North Star to show what good looks like, but also to help us build a pyramid of content. If that's what good looks like at the top of the pyramid, Do we have relevant case studies, examples? How do you measure health outcomes? How do you get performance measurement on a little website that, well, not it's a big website, a website we put out there that then helps people with their health? So we've tested it with teams, as mentioned, quite broadly, actually, certainly within NHS Digital, programs related to us, but not just NHS Digital. And we're starting to talk about this as a companion to GDS. So I see, actually, forevermore, we build on the great stuff that GDS have done, but apply it and tailor it for health. And hopefully we'll be doing a joint blog soon with GDS. So building on GDS, have I given enough name checks to GDS? We should have had some kind of payment thing going on. So some of these points will be similar to the new GDS standard. So work towards solving the whole problem, make the service easy to use, create a more joined up experience. And at that level, it's really easy to buy into it. But then what does that mean? You know, listening to the Secretary of State yesterday at the Empowered Person conference, axe the facts is still a thing within health. So when you think about joined up, and the big announcement yesterday was about email. And I think Matt Hancock said, we can't deal with the challenges of the 21st century technology until we've dealt with the 20th century technology. So there's something really interesting about what does a joined up experience, what does making a service easy to use in health? And Matt Hancock has obviously got some clear ideas about that. And then why we think it's particular to health is about support for tough issues, and particularly in health. So I've mentioned measuring success and tech choices. Terence Eden's here, and we're going to talk to him afterwards about being open source. We have a new initiative. Ian Phoenix talked yesterday at the Empowered Person conference about our desire for open source, but equally if you talk to some of the providers in health, they're not quite as keen about being open as you might think. And we want to help challenge that. We want to, if there's real cases why we can't or don't want to be, then we should be out there and being quite open and proud about that point. Or we should just be open. And we will be doing some work about measuring success on health outcomes for the next phases of redesign of NHS UK. And we're very interested in other case studies. So we're talking to the NHS Business Service Authority. There's a prescription certificate, I believe, which can save people money. And the amount of people not taking that up is quite significant, and it's a real hard measure. So we want to gather a number of examples of this so other teams who are working in health know what good looks like. Yeah, and so let's call it extra for health. So interoperability. I don't know how you make it interoperable if you've got a fax machine as part of your service. But the amount of logins. So if you're familiar in health, people talk about Leica, but I'll mention personal health records. So Stuart Fishman producing a toolkit for guidance and principles for personal health records. But where and how do you access personal health records or summary care records? What login do you use? We've launched NHS login, but that joining up across a fragmented health service is A, very important, but B, very difficult. And so if you think about that pyramid, if you think about that pyramid of content, so this is about how. So if you have a guiding standard at the top of the pyramid, a guiding North Star, how do you meet those standards? You may have a full multidisciplinary squad that likes of GDS, and we're fortunate to have, but we have Alison here who may have a team of one, who's trying to be a user researcher and a content designer and a delivery manager. And so we're thinking about how can our work be adopted or at least drawn from, whether it's a GP practice, a hospital trust, a small startup company who we've been talking to. I'll name check Tiny. Yeah. It doesn't assume that you must have a massive squad. It's nice, but you know, it's all about user needs and delivering the service. And relevant examples. So if we go to the next slide. So standard content, use cases. Gov have done a lot of this stuff, so why reinvent the wheel? So we'll link out to Gov, we'll link out to blog posts. So if you think about our audiences, not everyone has the same language. So never mind health literacy, there's digital literacy. So a well-written blog post, and because I saw him, Tero wrote a blog post, I think, or it was published yesterday about NHS login. So writing about our work in an accessible and easily consumable manner so people get digital. So guiding North Star, content that tells you how to reach it, and examples of other people who've done that work who you can maybe go and talk to. And so in terms of what next, we're going to test this hypothesis for real, because there's a really curious thing about when you say a thing and you kind of keep forging ahead until you're stopped. And we're seeing some nice comments in Twitter about how far we've come in a year. We're just going to keep pushing on this because it's a useful construct for us in terms of our content. So this idea of a pyramid of content, where we focus next in terms of our guidance. But we are talking to the Department of Health and Social Care about how this fits with the pipeline assurance model. And Ian, Hilary, Kate and Ben, we do need to get back to you, but we've been a bit busy in the last couple of weeks. And we're looking to use it nearer to us here in Skipton House on the Empowered Person portfolio. So the Empowered Person is a range of discrete products, and we'll be working with the Empowered Person team to start to use this hypothesis for real. And as I mentioned before, we'll be talking more to GDS, blogging about it, about how we can build our work together. And so we're getting towards the end. Just checking on time, we're doing quite well. We're providing lots of time for questions, so I hope you think about it. So if you have questions, email us at service-manual@nhs.net. We are keeping an eye on the email, and we will be picking up questions there as well as here. But in terms of what next, I'm passing up to Mohammed.
Hello, everybody. So I'm Mohammed. Just want to kind of reinforce the reminder that Ian just said about we'll be taking some questions from the floor, and for the people on YouTube, please send us some messages via email to service-manual@nhs.net. So in terms of what's next, our focus is really around kind of building on our hypothesis and our prototype and testing it with people for real. And kind of building on that pyramid that Ian described around guidance. So specific areas that are relevant for health include, clinical safety, interoperability, user-centered design and accessibility. So we're working on curating and building that guidance so that teams could deliver the how around the standards. And we're very much keen on people contributing towards the service manual and the standards. So, if you're a designer or a developer and you've reviewed the components and code that is within the service manual, and you feel that there's a user need that can be clearly evidenced around a component that doesn't exist at the moment, then tell us about it. Tell us about it by emailing us or joining the conversation on Slack. So Slack's really cool. It's open, it's collaborative. We like to get feedback on Slack. We like people asking us questions. We like to post updates on Slack. So, feed us contributions to kind of build a more open, robust, transparent service manual that can be applicable and relevant for teams across health. But also around standards, we need to build on the guidance, and we need to know about relevant health-related examples for the guidance part of the standards. So, if there's things out there that you've used in the past that has helped you build better products and services, then please share. So just recap on what we've covered today. Thank you everyone for turning up. It's been phenomenal, to be honest. So we've covered the NHS service manual, so an introduction to that. We talked about the redesign of the NHS website and how the service manual fed into that. Ben and Michael talked about the front-end library and the prototyping kit. Sarah and Caroline also then went on to talk about the content style guide and the A to Z that we've recently launched, and the new guidance that we've released around health literacy. Hayley and Ian then talked to us about the emerging service standard for the NHS. And I'd now like to open up to the floor for any questions. Don't be shy. Come on, there must be one.
I'll start. First of all, thank you to the whole team for a really interesting showing out. Massively impressive output and outcome. I'm just curious, could you give us any sense of the sort of size and scale of the effort that's gone into that? Sort of average number of people working on this?
Yeah. So what would be great is if the speakers maybe come along here. The question for the benefit of anyone on YouTube. Do you want to swing through? You can probably go around the back. Block the screen, it's not a problem. So the question was around the time and effort that it's taken for us to build the stuff that we've talked about today.
So if I lead on that, so it's not a hollow kind of statement when I say building on the work of GDS. So we were doing a thing anyway. As Dean said, it was an old and big website. So redesign of NHS UK for accessibility and mobile was a no-brainer. 70% of our traffic was is based on mobile devices. So we had a job to do for Expo last year in September. A number of us have only been in the place for a year plus. So we had some clear targets to deliver stuff that gave benefit, whether that's benefit of pages loading faster because of better code. We published more medicines pages, hi Louise, for Expo and a range of other things. So I'm not just going to say that the cost was incidental over and above that work, but if you're working in digital in 2018, 2019, building I'm going to call it a design system, though we don't really, but think about folding that work into a pattern library. I'm going to call it incidental cost. The actual team on standards has varied between 4 and 5 people. And then the redesign team has been more fluid, based up in Leeds, but they were doing that job that we paid to do, as it were, to redesign NHS UK. So a core standards team, 4 to 5, building on the work of GDS, and we are writing a case study with GDS, where I glibly said we built the format pattern elements in about 4 weeks. If we were starting from scratch, it might have took 4 years. First off, because year 1 and 2 is about getting permission and trying to explain why we should do it in this way. And then if you're lucky, you can another year business case to build the squad and then build it. And that may go to the Cabinet Office case study. So it must be true by the time we get it to that. So rather than 4 years, 4 weeks. And so I'm not trying to, downplay the cost, but we had a job to do. I'm going to call it almost incidental costs on top of it. Fantastic work from the teams around us on content. So James and the health literacy and Mark and Anna and so on. So the work, again, it's kind of almost like the work you had to do to be to have good health literacy in our content for NHS UK. It doesn't take that much work on top to write a blog post, to write some standards, he says. But we may be making a case for more money, because if you give us more money, we can do even more. I'm going to guess that doesn't quite answer the question.
It's a useful answer.
It's worth saying as well that, obviously, we've built a lot on GDS stuff, but the work that was done as part of the NHS alpha and beta phases, where there's a huge explosion of work on trying new ways of working, we took so much from that. There was so much stuff learned and so much research done, whether it was the medicines product or registered with the GP that Trilly was working on. There was loads of stuff that was learned discreetly, and part of our job was just to sort of funnel that all into something that was a bit more consistent. So a load of the groundwork had already been done. And also it's worth saying as well that people have been trying to do this kind of work, build a service manual kind of internally for a while, because they could see the value in doing it. But it kind of showed that if you were kind of doing it as a side project or just as an output of your main deliverable piece of work, it was never going to meet the kind of needs that we all need. So it needed the investment of an actual team looking at it. So
can I just add to this from a question I think that's coming from our online viewers, is around benefits. How we're going to show the benefits of this, and as in real hard figures. Is that a fair representation, Eric, of the question? So I'll start with, we're about to do some work on how you measure health outcomes, or the role that NHS.UK has in contributing to health outcomes of the nations. We're doing this work with Public Health England workshop next week, where you think about inputs and outputs and a logic model. If we do this, then this may lead to that, and that may lead to longer term health outcomes, which includes national indicators, whether that's cancer or obesity or uptake of Couch 5K and so on. And it's going to be quite an interesting piece of work. So it's really difficult. How do you track from publishing web pages, visits to those web pages, to improving the health of our users? So we're doing a workshop on Tuesday, that inputs, outputs logic model. We're going to use that for NHS.UK, but probably use it as a standard way of measuring benefits. If it works for NHS UK, it should work for the service manual. And on last week, we had a chat with colleagues from Public Health England and GDS, and seeing if 'cause it's a similar issue, similar problem. GDS service manual, NHS digital service manual. How do we show benefits? All the good folk here and online. How do you track usage, uptake, and then end output? So, because we're all in a financially pressured environment, and as we go forward, we will be making the business case based on benefits. And the kind of work starts now. We're still in beta. It's not an excuse. It took a year with that small team, and we'll be looking to how we can grow and scale and sustain going forward.
Is there any more questions? Yeah.
Could you tell us about your main stakeholders and maybe give us a number of the stakeholders you've been working with?
Thank you very much, Mariola. That's a very good question about our stakeholders. So who are our main stakeholders? I will start with our commissioners. So our commissioners were NHS England. Juliet Bauer as Chief Digital Officer for NHS England before she left us. As part of the Empowered Person, they commissioned and in part funded the work. As time has gone on, so you still have an NHS England Empowered Person, but you have NHS Digital Citizen Health Tech. So we have two significant stakeholders in terms of NHS England commissioning and NHS Digital, how we do development, how we build stuff. And then I'm going to go from that to our stakeholders are as big as the NHS. So on various presentations, we've got kind of onion ring circles. We're building out from NHS UK. You have centres of excellence here you've heard about around content and design, accessibility. And our work, we hope, is of benefit to NHS Digital, the organisation we sit. But then you go out to the broader health system and service, whether that's suppliers working in it, whether it's hospital trust, GPs, startup companies. That's why being open source, reaching out to people. We have a nice little travelogue, whether it's from the Exotica of Preston to Newcastle to Frimley. We have to get out and about. I just wish we were more Europe. No, I better stop there. Thank you, Mariola.
Is there any more questions on the floor?
Yeah. Well, sort of a question, also, I guess, just a bit of feedback. I'm from Public Health England. I'm a content designer. I've been reading your style guide over the last week or so. I have to say it's fantastic. It's really good. And actually, for all the work you've done building on GDS, actually, this is something GDS don't cover, and it's something that we at Public Health England could really use. So I think we're going to be drawing on this. You know, like I say, I think it's really, really useful for us. But actually, to some extent, I think you're kind of ahead of the game. But I hope GDS are paying attention to what you're doing. Because something that really stood out to me from your style guide are the research insights, right, that you put through. And what I noticed from my own experience as a content designer is that you highlighted the most controversial style decisions to give those research insights, right? So I'm thinking things like negative contractions, which we know was a big one last year in kind of GDS style. Also things around the poo and wee. Now the GDS A to Z doesn't have any of that. And so often when we have stakeholders pushing back against the content decisions we make, you know, to be able to say, this is the research insight that has led to this style decision would be so useful. So that's something that I'd actually like to see GDS learn from this and incorporate into their own style guide, regardless of whether the content is health related or not, because I think it would be super useful for content designers across government. So really well done, and you know, looking forward to probably working with you on this at some point, because it's just so useful for what we do. That's it, really. Yeah.
Can I, whilst the mic goes back, can I just build on that? It's not an area of weakness, but as we were looking at our content style guide, so things like infographics, video, or imagery. So I say sometimes rivers of text, which is entirely appropriate a lot of the time. But in health, if you think of photographs of conditions, it's a real challenging area of how you use photographs and infographics and when and how you might use video. And looking across actually a whole raft of design systems, government, I was surprised actually how little guidance, and it's one of our areas we'll be focusing on, guidance for different types of content going forward in this space.
You had a question over there?
It might just be a meta question, but did you take yourselves through the standards, the service standards that you were using to develop your beta?
I'm looking at Eric, our designer, because we had exactly that chat. How do we know we went through alpha into beta? And I'm going to say in spirit, absolutely. Because there's a bunch of time pressures, and we're very fortuitous in terms of hitting Expo, as it were, in September, when the Secretary of State first stood up and then published in October the vision. and I'm quite glad we did it in spirit and as a true product manager, focusing on delivery and hitting some important political dates. I think as we go into live and change from beta to where we were, I think absolutely we will go down that route and test ourselves. I think that may be one of the things we may talk to Department of Health and Social Care about. So thank you for that question. But yes.
Okay. Should we take some questions online?
Yeah, so we've got a few. So we've got a question from Liz. Asking, is your vision for the service standard just that it's a guiding North Star with helpful know-how as opposed to a standard that you seek to enforce?
So for the benefit of the audience, this is about whether the standard is a guiding North Star, as in something you may aspire to, or something that is enforced, or we've used the word mandated. I'm conscious I'm talking too much. I mean, we have covered that in our research. Hayley, do you want to talk about when we asked the question?
We started off our discovery research looking at the assessment process. We learned standard and assessment process. So we learned a lot about assurance that's happening in government, but also elsewhere. We decided after our discovery to focus on a standard because we realised that looking at the whole assurance process around that was a very big thing to do at once. I think the goal in the future is that it will be assured against, but at the moment we know when we identified two types of users that would be interested in following something even if it's not mandated. So you've got those kind of aware and interested people, and you've got those that kind of bought into it anyway. There's a small minority of people that are kind of reluctant adopters, and they probably won't change if it's not mandated, but we're hoping there'll be a good percentage of people that will benefit from having something to point to and convince others.
And I think that's part of our conversations with the Department of Health and Social Care. So we know from GDS, it's a big effort, a big resource to run an assessment service. And the authority, if it comes, would come from the Department of Health and Social Care pipeline assurance model. So that assurance model is very much around having a long term, and within that model, assuring that the right thing is being done. And I think that's one of the questions we're going to explore. Many things will still be formally GDS assessed, whether it's spend control or for volume of transactions. But when you're on a content-rich website, or if you're working in a hospital trust, I think the question of enforcement and mandation is an interesting one, but it's one we're going to explore. We were clear in our work, we were going to focus on having a hypothesis that you could actually have a proper conversation then around should this be self-assessed internally within teams or programs, or should it be something that would be mandated? And I think that's what we're going to be exploring next.
Any more questions online?
Yeah, so we have a tricky question, I guess. Steven's asking, why could all the health information not be put into gov.uk instead of having a separate NHS.uk platform?
So off the top of my head, we've touched on some of it around NHS, the power of the logo. It's interesting if you are lucky enough to be working in this agile digital world. GDS is a guiding North Star for us. You know, there's a lot of admirers of it. But many people who work in health aren't familiar with GDS, and, you know, Whitechapel and all the, I look around us, have a diversity of people working here. It's not the same in all places. So for me, one of the big differentiators is that identity, the brand of the NHS. The other is all of that stuff around empathy with health. So we saw it in some of our research around understanding not the challenges of health, but the differences, understanding those people, patient, family and support journeys. We have teams doing user research. That means we are deeply empathetic to that, and we are testing our solutions against that user need. I think asking Gov and GDS to do all of that, you know, there is a clue, government, health, you know, I think it's legitimate that 1.5 million people in the workforce, I'm going to have a guess at multi-millions, I'm going to say 50 million potential users of the NHS service. It probably merits its own service standard and service manual.
I'll step in there as well. People trust the NHS. It's just over 70 years old now. It's hugely powerful, and in all the research we've done, people trust the NHS in a way they have a relationship with the NHS in a way that they don't have with government. So people see government as a very transactional thing that we've mentioned before, renew car tax or work out what benefits you're entitled to. Whereas the NHS is much more of a, people have a lifetime relationship with it, whether it's with themselves or people they're caring for. So it merits a kind of completely different approach to presenting content. And also we do a lot of work around trying to encourage good health, as well as sort of just fixing you when you're ill. So, we've got a lot of research into how people are suspicious of the nanny state. So if you had a government page telling you how to do couch to 5K, that's a bit different to what we would do when we were building something to do that. So it's all about what the message and what's the appropriate way to send that message to people in a way that they can understand and trust. So thanks.
Probably got time for one more question. We do plan to reply to every question that's come in from email. So we will be, within the next few days, trying to get back to everyone. Maybe take one more question on the floor. Yeah.
It's a bit left field, and then it's a good last question. But I wondered if you thought much about whether this will get picked up by third sector organisations. Obviously, a lot of people's health journeys span NHS and non-NHS.
Yeah.
I just wondered if that's come up.
So, so this is a question about third sector, so charities. Yeah. So I'm going to start the answer with yes. So a couple of weeks ago, we were talking to Asthma UK, explicitly around our work, around standards, because we didn't touch on it today. But if you took, everyone's talking about standards. There's nice evidence framework. There's the code of conduct for tech, so on and so on. I mean, there's our work, and some of the charities are kind of looking and thinking, what do we follow? You know, where do we start? And yes, asking the question, must we use this? And NHS UK is a piece of valuable web real estate, and those partners I think are very important to, because again, why reinvent the wheel? And so we've started conversations with people like Asmi. I believe colleagues have talked to folks like Macmillan. And I think where we'll get to is you buy into it as little or as much as you can or want. So certainly some of the chats of, you know, you've got a front-end library here and a prototyping kit. Just some of the fundamentals like grid and spacing and responsive design, start there and then layer up. So some of the content standards of the design. And I'm not debating our design. You know, stick a different logo at the top, change the color. I'm not going there. I'm not at all going there. It's based on user needs and so on. But so the answer is yes, in a big way, and it's not where we're at the moment in our kind of evolution. We're kind of sharing. We want people to talk to us. If folks adopt it, great, and we'd like to see, I think, you know, different needs, different use cases. So yes, and yes, please, and for as long as we can, we'll go and talk to folks, share our work, and hear what their particular needs are. And as part of the redesign of NHS UK, that health outcome journey, so upstream traffic, downstream traffic, how we partner with, where and how we feature, whether it's the NHS app or other apps. There's interesting questions about who do you feature, and is there like a league or a favoured list or whatever. So I think there are some challenges to that, but there's definitely our desire to build those upstream, downstream journeys, recommend apps or websites or services where we aren't the total solution provider.
Cool. So that brings us to 30 seconds to 3 o'clock. So thank you very much, everyone. I'll just reinforce the thing about contribute to us. So, you know, health is massive. It's a massive sector. We're on a journey. So just please get in touch with any feedback or any comments or anything that you feel that could help us as part of this journey. Join our Slack or just email us. We're still going to be around for a bit. So if you want to have a chat with us, please do approach us.
But we should end on a round of applause for everyone. And I mean everyone at home as well. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.